I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the book that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. He's the author of the book Manhattan, The Rising War, no other than Mr. Sal Cosenza.
Hello.
Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Sal, and can you please introduce more about
Well,
yourself?
yes. Well, thank you, Daniel, for having me. This is great. My name is Sal Cosenza, as you had mentioned, and I am the author of the book. I'm also a painter. I love art. I use acrylic paint usually, and I am a professor at a university, and I teach
Wow.
design. And for about, I would say since 2001, since 9/11, I was totally enamored by New York City, New York skyscrapers, architecture in general. And so this book is sort of it's so cliched, but it's a love letter to the city in my own way.
That'd be awesome. Love letters.
Yes,
So, would you be my guest on my abstract essay and let's do scrutinize your painting?
please do.
Yes, yes, yes.
I love scrutiny.
After this, okay, after our book 101 review, you will be my guest on Abstract Essay. Who knows, you will be my co host. I'm looking for a co host on Abstract Essay. Abstract Essay is dedicated for artists like you, like me, and everybody out there who's having a artistic, phenomenal thinking. So let's talk about your book. What is the central premise of Manhattan: The Rising War?
So it's a story about buildings that are living and breathing. It sounds silly, right? These are anthropomorphic characters. They run the city. Each building, whether it's Lady Liberty, whether it's Empire State Building, Chrysler Building, the Twin Towers, and 100 more, they all have a role. They all have sort of a job description, if you will.
Mm,
They coexist with the humans, but their creation is because of this sort of mystical um, energy that one designer, one sculptor actually, is able to tap into. And so once that happens, these buildings are able to come to life. And so it's really the story about a community like any other community, except they're talking buildings. And, it's historical fiction, so there is a lot that I draw from New York's history. New York has an extensive 400-year history of events of all kinds, right? So there are variations in here of 9/11, for example, right? The Twin Towers play a large role in this book. There's a sort of terror group, um, not really like the ones that we know that we're aware of, but variations. The whole thing is sort of an alternate history, and it's basically from the lens of the buildings, from the windows of the buildings, if I could be horribly punny, but it's from their vantage point.
yes, Mr. Sal Consenza. Thank you
Oh,
so
thank
much.
you.
Thank
Please.
you so much for sharing your
I'll, I'll,
talents to
I'll
the world.
I'll see you later. No, just
See
kidding.
you later. So, what time, again, thank you so much for sharing your talents to the world. So, what time period is Manhattan Rising War set in?
So it's I like to say timeless. It's an alternate timeline, right? So there's a variation on World War II. There is a 9/11, but it's not 9/11 2001. Um, it's the world that they exist in is not like the world that we live in, right? It's a series of towns, villages. The largest metropolis on this planet in this universe is Manhattan Island, which is why it's such a magnet in the story. there's this old adage, right, that New York City is, is the center of the world, right?
Yes.
Culturally and all of that, right? And if you buy into that, which I basically do, I lived there for 7 years. I love the city, right? But if you buy into that, you have to sort of, you know, make it the center of the story, right? And it is. It's very much a character, Manhattan Island. But again, it's not a Manhattan that that we are super familiar with. It's a fantastical version of Manhattan, and yet there are elements of the city that we would recognize. Anyone who visited Manhattan or New York at some point would pick up on some of these cues. But again, it's driven by the characters, which are these buildings, and they're not just boring buildings or inert buildings. There are buildings with individual personalities. I was very worried about that, making them sort of bland, right? So Lady Liberty has a very distinct sort of profile, right? Character profile. She sort of feels the city. She taps into the energy of the city. So when the city is doing well, she feels well. When the city is hurting, she's potentially in dire straits emotionally. Um,
So, what major event triggers the onset of war in the story?
what made me trigger the say that again? I'm sorry.
What major event triggers the
Oh,
onset of the war?
well, in the plot, there are a few events based on, again, reality. I don't want to get too political here, but there's a sort of January 6th variation where these Lady Liberty is basically attacked. Um, from there, we have a variation on 9/11 where two of our major characters are again attacked, right? And then that sort of drives the plot. It's you have the United Nations building, the UN building in this story, trying to come to a diplomatic compromise with this force that is attempting to sort of rework Manhattan in its own image. There's a baddie, the big bad of the story is somebody who's sort of a summary of many villains that we've had in the past century. He's sort of an amalgamation of all of them, and Manhattan is sort of uh, he he wants to claim Manhattan for his own, and he leads an army to try to do that. And 9/11 is sort of the first wave of attack, and then there's this. The story gets into this more you know War of the Worldsian kind of scenario where the buildings have to uh, really combat a raging force. And so it leads to, um, it draws from many resources. I take from, like, the mass exodus, if going back to like biblical stories, right? The exodus into the dunes, into the desert, and then, getting help and then maybe coming back to reclaim the city that was taken from them, right? So there's a lot of, I would say, mythological, biblical influences throughout this piece. Um, and it's
So,
based, sorry,
w-
go ahead.
so why does City of Manhattan serve as the backdrop of the narrative?
Well, that goes back to my love affair with New York City. Um, Ever since 9/11, I was about 14, I think 13 or 14 years old, and like everyone who saw it right on TV, I was transfixed. I was shocked. Um, and then the more and more footage I saw of the Twin Towers collapsing, I started to also notice the buildings behind them. I saw Empire State Building, Chrysler Building, and it felt to me like these were buildings that were sort of watching one of their or two of their colleagues die, right? And so that, as a 14-year-old, that stuck with me. And then I started painting. I created 5 paintings from 2002 to 2020, sort of chronicling this story. As I was working on these paintings, I was writing the book, which is based on the paintings. But the reason why it's in Manhattan is because I'm just fascinated by the city. My family, most of them come from New York. I lived in New York for 7 years, um, and I just love the energy of it. I love the fact that the city bounces back. It gets knocked down. If you look at its history, there are pivotal moments in its history where it could have easily sort of, you know, uh, I would say, been more subdued or been less of an important city by getting knocked down. But what it tended to do throughout its history was sort of get back up and rebuild itself. There were a series of fires that it had to endure. Um, of course, 9/11 happened. There were famines. Uh, its history is violent and it's got a lot of turbulence about it, right? Again, 400 years of craziness, right? New York City, and it has it all. I don't know. Have you ever had the chance to go there?
Yes, indeed. Long time ago.
Yeah. I'm curious about your thoughts on the city, the energy of it. What did you think?
Well, New York, if you say New York, the vibrant of the city is different comparing to other cities. If you say
Hmm.
New York, the most popular city in the world, which is, as I said, vibrant, every minute, every single, I think people want to see, to live, and experience what New York City is all about.
Yes.
And
It-
Mr. Sal, how do you establish the tone of conflict and tension in Manhattan, the Rising War?
it's sort of like a slow burner, the tension. It ratchets up, right? And it covers about, I would say, a century in the book. It's a century period of time. Um, this group, the antagonists, they start in the city. They sort of exist like in the subways and in underground, right? And it's this movement that is against the buildings. This idea that you could bring buildings to life. They're vehemently against that. They don't want that, right? So what they've done is created sort of a subgroup, right? Um, where they start sort of small. They start to pass out pamphlets, propaganda to each other. They start building their movement. And then what happens is when they get to a certain point of power, they take it out. They start to react, right? So they go against Lady Liberty, particularly because Lady Liberty is the first of these living buildings in the story. So they try to, they attack Lady Liberty. Um, they are then banished from the city. The city government and the buildings come together and decide we're gonna get rid of these foes, and they start relocating elsewhere and recruiting and more followers elsewhere. Uh, Decades go by. Uh, the book chronicles there's a variation on World War I or World War II. It's kind of ambiguous. It's called the Global War, right? So that's going on. New buildings are being built, or I should say, new buildings are being born. You have Empire State Building being born. You have Chrysler Building. They fall in love. So these are the first two buildings to experience romance in the city. Um, so the city is growing, the twin towers are born, but as that's happening, on another side of the world, there's this movement and there's this leader who really takes control of the movement and decides, he convinces his followers that we will take Manhattan. We will strike it and we will sort of claim it as our own. And so that's exactly what he plans to do. And then, it proceeds from there. I think the plot really kicks in around page like 100 or so, right? And then it really starts to just become a story of survival.
So, Mr. Saul, what will be your advice for those aspiring writers out there?
Well, this is my debut novel, so if I could do it, anyone could do it. I'll start with that. I would say some advice would be just to be patient. Um, for me, this book took me. I started it in 2012 in New York in a dorm room. I remember. I finished it at the beginning of this year in 2024. We had final edits. So, that's a huge amount of time. That's a big chunk of my life. I was living in two different states, right, as this was being written. The question, in my mind was, am I going to finish this book? Right? What century am I going to finish this book? So I think my biggest advice is just to be patient. If you're starting a book, right? If let's say you want to write a novel, right? This is my first novel. If you want to write one, just start it, right? Just create a story treatment, write the outline, and then just start writing. And then eventually it will build. It will become a short story length, and then it will be closer to a novel length. And then you could take it, as many words as you want, word count wise, um, and just let that process happen, right? And it might take, depending on how prolific you are or how your schedule is or whatever, it might take a few months. It might take many years, right?
Yes.
Um, the many years is scary, but I also recommend collaborating with people. So to get this book to look like this and to be an actual book, I had to work with an editor. I worked with an amazing graphic designer. I had many people read it and sort of give me their feedback, right? So I had a beta reader, and all of that. I have no regrets. I'm so glad that I collaborated with these people because I'm very proud of the final result, and I sort of am confident knowing that I took this book as far as I could, and I had it sort of reviewed by others. I don't know if you yourself paint also, but coming from a background of painting, so often it's you looking at the canvas, right? And sometimes you have to sort of step back and let somebody else look at it, or you have to spend a week away from it and come back to it because you'll have a fresh sort of mindset. And that's exactly what I did with the book. I needed somebody else to review it, to look at it, to give me their input, to make the story much more, just richer. Had I not, then it would have been open to a lot of issues.
Definitely. So, what is your short-term and long-term goals in writing?
Well, I've got another novel in mind. I've got the story treatment written. I'm going to start it soon. So my long-term goal is to finish another novel. I don't know how long it's going to take. This one took, forever and a day. Um, but again, however long it takes is however long it takes. I would love this next novel to um, also have a visual component. I love the idea of basing it off of a painting or a series of paintings. So I need to also start the paintings This will be another anthropomorphically themed book, but sort of, I guess, slightly darker, like darker in tone, sort of like a, well, okay, I'll give it some of it away. Sort of like a haunted skyscraper of the future,
Wow.
where the skyscraper sort of plays on people's fears and taps into them. And then there's a couple people who find that out, who discover that, and then they need to sort of stop it from happening. And there's an owner of the skyscraper who's letting this happen. So I think the villains are similar in this book that I wrote and the one I want to write. They're sort of power driven. Their egos are off the charts, and they have a level of, they're sinister, and they don't care who they crush to get to where they are. And so that's the antagonist, right? And the protagonist is sort of somebody who still believes in, everybody should be safe, believes in right and wrong, right?
Well,
So,
well, Mr. Sal, looking forward for that novel, and you are most welcome to come back and promote it on Book 101 Review. So, to sum up our episode for today, what does Manhattan the Rising War suggest about the causal war and human conflict on a societal level?
hmm. Yeah, and I mean, unfortunately, war is constant, right? And what this book is trying to say is that we can live in a utopia if we want to, right?
Yes.
And not a utopia that is problematic. This is a utopia, or this is a again, like this version of Manhattan is a community where everyone has a say. All of the buildings have something special about them. There's this direct relationship with the people that they serve, right? Because architecture should be for people, right? That's the reason why we have buildings. But there is this symbiotic relationship. And so it's a city that works. Um, and if we can do that, that would be wonderful. If we could learn from history, that would be great. Do I think we're there? No. Do I think we have a lot of progress to make? Absolutely. Right? I mean, so it's sad. I wish war was something that, people just wrote about, right? I wish it was not a reality. Um, but, hopefully at one point we will get there. We will
Yes,
realize
yes.
that war is not the answer.
Hope for the best. Yes, yes, yes. So, Mr. Sal Cosenza, thank you so much for sharing your talents to
Thank
the
you.
world. Thank you so much. Looking forward for more historical fiction novel like this.
Thank you, Daniel. I
Mr.
appreciate it.
Yes, this podcast is created for you. So, Mr. Sal, can you please invite our listeners to support Manhattan, the Rising War?
Yes, it's available. It's on Amazon. It's if you're in Arizona in the United States, it's at Changing Hands Bookstore in Tempe, Arizona. It's on Walmart.com. All of the mom and pop shops. No, but I guess they say wherever books are sold. It's
Yes,
so cliched. Oh, but
where the books are sold. That's
but
be awesome.
I look forward to reach out to me on salcosenza.com, my website. I always look forward to hearing from fellow creatives,
Yes.
like Daniel.
Yes, indeed. Yes, people, let's support Mr. Sal Cosenza. As I said, more historical fiction novel to come if you support him. So, Mr. Sal, thank you for your time.
Likewise. Thank you, Daniel.
More to come, people. See you soon.